even you and I have had this conversation in the past, but to the extent that the Republican Party just has a decades-long jump on getting voters to care, and that I think the exit polls I saw after the 2016 election were that Democrats who prioritized the court just didn't care enough to show up, and by about a 2-to-1 margin, Republicans who cared about the court voted for Donald Trump, even though they didn't like Donald Trump. So there's a big, I guess we call it the enthusiasm gap or focus gap. You're making the point, and I agree with you, that we can't teach folks that between now and September. What is the best argument we can make for people who just think the court happens out in the world and has no connection to the future of healthcare, reproductive rights, the future of the environment, all the stuff that you have been trying to tell them to connect as long as I've heard you talk about it? What's the message? How do we catch up?
The immediate way to connect a judicial appointee into somebody's personal life is to talk about what choice means. I mean, an entire generation of women has grown up with Roe versus Wade, basically guaranteeing certain rights that they have. And while the Republicans have nibbled at it, the fundamental force of Roe versus Wade is intact. And if that is to fall, that will be a stunning change in circumstances for a very great number of women. And now that we have the Attorney General of the United States claiming that the protection for people of pre-existing medical conditions is legally indefensible, it's suddenly plausible to imagine a court that might say the same thing and throw that out. And now you've got everybody in the country who has a family member with a pre-existing condition remembering the days when, they were job locked in because they could never get new coverage, or they had to spend down to Medicare because they couldn't get coverage at all, or because they couldn't get coverage, simply had to forego life-saving treatments. Those are the two, I think, biggest ways in which, if this court starts messing around politically in those areas, real people will see a real and dramatic change, a kind of baseline shift, earthquake style, in their what they now consider to be kind of expected, settled ways of life. The problem, I think, is we have to be able to persist. And if you never start making the argument that this is a court that has essentially been captured by special interests and is running the tables with these 5-4 decisions, then there's going to be another nomination after that for which we're not prepared, and there's going to be another nomination after that for which we're not prepared. Preparation may seem a little bit late right now that we have a nomination, but if we don't start, then we'll always be unprepared until there's suddenly a vacancy, and now we're in a mad scramble again. So we've got to do a better job of helping the public see what is going on.
I've got sort of frowny eyebrows because I think you've just said the thing that worries me the most, which is it almost doesn't matter what happens at confirmation hearings, that we have rote questions, rote answers, that the answers are not only vanishingly useless in terms of giving us any real insight into the nominee. But as you've seen, I've watched you on the Judiciary Committee this year. The answer to everything is, I can't answer that. There's a Ginsburg Rule, ostensibly, that holds that you can't answer, even though Ginsburg actually spoke at great length about Roe v. Wade. But what do you do? I mean, I've seen you up there looking like you wanted to throw something. But if the response is simply, I can't talk about it.
It's very frustrating. You have 5 or 7 minutes. You have a candidate who has been murder boarded by professionals to be able to withstand 5 to 7 minutes, to run out the clock with long answers, and to spoon feed essential judicial pablum to us, and at no costs answer any hard questions. And then when they're through, the Republicans all automatically vote for them, and onto the court they go, and the next thing you know, they're making these decisions that protect the big corporate special interests and that damage American democracy in favor of the big influencers and away from regular people. It's frustrating.
Let's go back to the part where you said it's not time to give up. If we assume that those hearings are a teachable moment for the American public to understand, even if, you can't muster the votes and maybe the votes will be there, and I know it turns on who the nominee is, what is the teachable moment here? What do we do? What are your questions going to be that will try to puncture this just seemingly brick wall of I can't answer, it may come before me. Even Brown is no longer discussable. The trend that you've seen towards simply running out the clock, what do you do with your time? What can we watch Senate Democrats to do that will help, if nothing else, set the table for this conversation in a more rigorous way going forward?
I think the teachable moment here comes from this array of 5-4 decisions in which all the Republicans line up and do something new and different. And if you look at them, there are probably 20 of them, all in all. It is far beyond any statistical explanation other than bias. You just can't justify it by the supposed balls and strikes theory of Justice Roberts. It's a pattern. It's a distinct pattern. And the average American is not familiar with, 6 or 7 Supreme Court opinions on, campaign finance, gerrymandering, and Voting Rights Act. They're not familiar with the array of decisions on, class actions and forced arbitration and discrimination and union power. So you got to line it up for them so that they see the picture. You can't expect somebody who's got a busy life of their own and a family of their own to figure out that pattern unless somebody lays it out for them. And what we have not done a good job of is laying out the pattern of these, again, probably 25-4 decisions, all of which point in exactly the same direction. And that direction is always to the benefit of the biggest corporate influencers who are at play in our politics, whether it's to support them in electing Republicans at the polls and making sure that the Democrat side always loses, whether it's gerrymandering or voter suppression or dark money, or whether it's making sure that no corporation has to spend an unfortunate moment in a courtroom facing somebody who they've injured. When you see the pattern, it becomes unforgettable, I think. Maybe it's just because it's the way I practice law, and it was, stunning to me that courts would have that kind of a pattern emerge. But I think showing the American public that pattern is the way to get them engaged. Because, by God, I don't care whether you're Tea Party or Bernie Sanders progressive, you believe as an American that when you get your day in court, that day in court is not going to have some big special influence's thumb on the scales against you, and you're not going to have to walk into a courtroom with judges who are predisposed to rule against you just because of who you are. That is something that I think virtually every American agrees on.